Welcome to the Utah Retirement System's webinar series. While this webinar has been pre-recorded, the information is still relevant. Please see the description below for links to the different sections within the video and other helpful information. We hope you find this webinar to be a useful resource in your retirement planning.
Let's go ahead and get started, and I'll go ahead and I'll turn to the first slide, and we can start with the question that oftentimes comes up: what is a required minimum distribution? There's oftentimes two different acronyms used that mean the same thing. One of them is RMD, which means required minimum distribution. But other times in the press or in financial magazines or newspapers, you'll also hear the term minimum required distribution, or MRD. Those two terms are synonymous. The one that we use here at Utah Retirement Systems is RMD, or required minimum distribution. Required minimum distributions must be taken from tax-deferred accounts, and those tax-deferred accounts that we have here at Utah Retirement Systems are the 401k, 457, and traditional IRA accounts. Roth IRA accounts are after-tax dollars and do not require a minimum distribution. Essentially, the reason for a required minimum distribution is the government now wants you to start withdrawing those pre-tax dollars that you have saved. And as you withdraw them, they are then taxable income. And so that's why it's not required on a Roth IRA, is because you've already paid the taxes on that money, and so there are no taxes due when you withdraw that. One of the questions that comes up, and I've just alluded to this, is people will always wonder when it's time to take their required minimum distribution if they will owe state and federal taxes on that money. And required minimum distributions are regular old taxable income, and so state and federal income taxes are required. When it comes to calculating a minimum required distribution, we will show you how that works here in just a second. But a required minimum distribution is done by using a very specific IRS formula that we'll talk about here in a few slides. We'll also talk about if you don't take your required minimum distribution, there are some substantial penalties that can be assessed by the IRS, and we'll do an example of that here in just a few slides as well. Not to despair, though, here at Utah Retirement Systems, we're more than happy to help you in calculating your minimum required distribution and making sure that your minimum required distribution gets taken. So we'll talk about the different ways that URS can help you here in just a minute. Let me go ahead and let's kind of talk through some of the specifics of when a required minimum distribution must be taken. Your minimum required distributions must be taken by December 31st of each calendar year, as you see on the first bullet point of the slide there. When you turn age 70 and a half, your first required minimum distribution can be delayed until April 1st of the year following the year you turn 70 and a half. So in other words, if I was turning 70 and a half this year, I could delay taking my first minimum required distribution until the next year. Now, if I did that, in the following year, I'm going to have to take two minimum required distributions. I'm going to have to take one for this year, the one that I delayed, but then I'm also going to have to take one for the year that I'm actually taking it in. So I just point that out because sometimes when people defer taking their minimum required distribution in their first year, they're surprised in the following year that they must take two. The one that they deferred from the prior year, plus the one for the current year. And sometimes where that can be problematic is as people go to figure their taxes, that then gives them two minimum distributions in 1 year and sometimes can give them more taxable income than they desired for that year. So if you do delay taking your first minimum required distribution and decide to defer it till April 1st of the following year, be aware that there could be some tax consequences, and you may want to consult with a tax advisor. And again, just to reiterate, if you did defer that first one to the following year, the one that's deferred is due by April 1st, and then the minimum required distribution for the current year needs to be taken by December 31st. But be aware of those potential tax consequences. One of the questions that oftentimes we get here at the retirement office are which accounts need a required minimum distribution and how are those minimum required distributions segregated between the different accounts. As you look at the chart here on this slide, you'll notice on the left-hand side in the blue heading we've got the 401k and 457 accounts. The 401k and 457 accounts, there needs to be a required minimum distribution taken from each of those accounts, and they must each be taken separately from those accounts. You cannot add those two accounts together and take one minimum required distribution from one of those accounts. The IRS requires that you must take a separate minimum distribution from each the 401k and the 457. There's of these three accounts that folks have with us here at Utah Retirement Systems, the 401k and 457 and the traditional IRA, the traditional IRA that you see on the right-hand side is a little bit different. With the traditional IRA, many people will have 3 or 4 or even 5 different traditional IRA accounts. They could have them one here at URS, but then perhaps they have another one at a bank or a credit union or a mutual fund or insurance company. So the IRS requires that you must calculate a minimum required distribution from each of those accounts if you have several different traditional IRA accounts. However, the total minimum distribution for the IRA accounts can be taken from just one of the IRA accounts. Let me turn the slide and show you an example of that I think might be a little easier to understand this concept. On this next slide, you'll see that we've got an IRA, a traditional IRA account at a bank. We've got another traditional IRA account at a credit union. And then we have a traditional IRA here at the Utah Retirement Systems. In this made-up scenario here, we have just assumed that the required minimum distribution from the bank IRA is $500. The minimum distribution from the credit union IRA is $1,000. And the minimum required distribution from the URS IRA is $600. So that gives a total of $2,100 in minimum required distributions that need to be taken from IRA accounts. Now in this example, you could take $500 from the bank, $1,000 from the credit union, $600 from the URS IRA account, just as it shows there on the slide. Or you could combine it all and take $2,100 from one of the IRA accounts, and that would satisfy the requirement to take a minimum distribution from the IRA accounts. Now remember, this combining of the IRA accounts, if I go back to the prior slide, can just be done from traditional IRA accounts. The 401k and 457 accounts, you must take separate minimum distributions from each of those. So those are the accounts that they're required from and how those withdrawals must be taken. what I would like to touch on is some of the exceptions that come up when we do not need to take required minimum distributions. If you are still employed at age 70 and a half by a URS participating employer, you can delay taking your required minimum distribution from your URS, 401k, and 457 plans until the year that you terminate employment with that URS covered employer. Let me just give you an example. Let's pretend that I'm teaching school for the Granite School District, an employer that belongs to the Utah Retirement Systems. And I've got a 401k and a 457 plan and a traditional IRA plan here with Utah Retirement Systems. If I'm still teaching school with Granite School District at age 70 and a half, I will not need to take a minimum distribution for my 401k or my 457 plan. As you see noted on the very last bullet point of the slide, regardless of my employment status, I will need to take a minimum distribution from my traditional IRA account. But with my 401k and 457 plans, I can defer taking the minimum distribution until the year that I terminate employment. So if I'm 70 and a half now, and let's pretend that I keep on working for Granite School District for 2 more years, and I terminate employment in June of 2021, then that is when I will need to start taking my minimum distribution. In 2021, that year that I terminate, and let's just say I'm 72 years old at that time, that's when I'll have to take my first minimum distribution from the 401k and 457 plans. Now, in that scenario, we send out letters at age 70 and a half from the retirement office letting our participants know that they're 70 and a half and that they do need to start taking their minimum required distribution. If you are still employed by a URS covered employer at age 70 and a half and need to start taking that minimum distribution, we'll go ahead and help you with that. However, if you are still employed at age 70 and a half and you want to defer taking that minimum distribution, then be sure to call us and let us know that you're still working for that URS covered employer and you would like to defer taking that minimum distribution. If you do not give us a call and let us know that you're still employed at 70 and a half and that you and that you want to defer taking that minimum distribution, then we're going to send that money out of your account at the end of the calendar year. And I'll give you an example of that here in just a minute. I think the key thing to remember is that if you're at age 70 and a half and you want to defer taking that minimum distribution because you're still employed for a URS participating employer, you will need to let us know that here at the retirement office. Let me go ahead and turn our attention from some exceptions to some penalties that can occur if you do not take your minimum distribution when you're required to. The IRS's penalty for not taking your minimum distribution is 50% of the amount not taken. So as you see on the slide there in the example, if your required minimum distribution is $5,000 and you do not take that minimum required distribution, then you will need to take the $5,000 required minimum distribution plus an additional penalty of 50%, which would be $2,500. So in total, you'd need to be withdrawing, in this example, $7,500. That penalty can be stiff, and so we just encourage you not to miss your required minimum distribution. Make sure you stay on top of that and take that distribution. Let me go ahead and show you now an example of how that required minimum distribution is calculated. Some of you maybe have already received required minimum distributions in prior years, and maybe you've been receiving them for several years, but are just not aware how they are calculated each year. And so let's walk through a quick example of how that required minimum distribution is calculated. How we do that is we take your account balance on December 31st of the prior year. So if we were calculating your minimum distribution for 2019, we would take your account balance on December 31st of 2018. Now, some of you may be wondering, where do I get my December 31st account balance, or where can I access that? Probably the easiest way to access your December 31st balance is to log into your My URS account, and that's really easy by going to www.urs.org, and then in the upper right hand corner you'll see where you can log into your account. Once you log into your account, at the bottom of the screen you'll see the URS Document Center. Or once you see that Document Center at the bottom of the screen, you can then access your fourth quarter statement. And then on that fourth quarter statement, you'll be able to see the account balance for December 31st. Let me go ahead, turn the slide, and let's walk through an example. Pardon me, before we do that example, let me just touch on a quick item here. We divide that December 31st account balance by what's called a distribution factor. The distribution factors are taken from the IRS publication 590 if you wanted to Google that or search that on the web to get the details. Generally speaking, there's a table called the Uniform Lifetime Table in that publication 590 that most people will use. There's a joint lifetime table that can be used if your spouse is 10 years or more younger than you. What's happening with that joint lifetime table, if you have a spouse that is 10 or more years younger than you, the factors that are in that joint lifetime table allow you to take a little smaller minimum distribution, the notion being that way with a spouse that is significantly younger, it'll stretch out the account a little bit longer. Otherwise, if you don't have a spouse that is 10 or more years younger, you will need to use the Uniform Lifetime Table. Okay, let me go ahead and get to the example that I alluded to earlier here on the next slide. Here on the next slide, we've got an example of somebody whose account balance on December 31st was $50,000. And as you see on line number 2, their date of birth is June 12th, 1949, so they'll be 70 and a half this year. You'll see on line 3 that the distribution factor is 27.4, and you'll see off to the right there we just took the distribution factors from the IRS's Uniform Lifetime Table in publication 590, and we listed those factors for ages 70 through 75. But you'll see that at age 70 it's 27.4. So if the account balance is $50,000 on December 31st, so you're age 70 this year, so we're going to use that factor of 27.4. So as you see on line number 4, it's just as simple as taking $50,000 divided by 27.4, which would give us a required minimum distribution of $1,824.82. Now, just to take that example one step further, next year, let's just pretend that this individual's account balance next year was maybe $48,000. If their account balance was $48,000 next year, then we would just move down to the next row on the table off to the right. They'd be 71. And so then we would divide the account balance by 26.5. So we would just take that $48,000 hypothetical balance next year and divide it by 26.5, and that would then generate the minimum required distribution. So hopefully you can kind of get the idea of how that works and how you would work down that table. Now, one of the things that comes up, and a question that we get a lot here at the retirement office, is people will say, you know, when I'm turn age 70 and a half, the IRS is going to require me to take out my entire account, or I'm going to be required to take out almost all of my account. And that's a misnomer. And let me just show you, it's really what the name says, it's the required minimum distribution. And as you see on this next slide, we're using the same example that we just used on the prior slide, that you're age 70 this year, and your account balance on December 31st was $50,000. So as you see down on row 4, the required minimum distribution is $1,824, just exactly what we had calculated on the prior slide. But as you see out to the graphic on the right-hand side, what it's showing you there is that this really is a minimum amount of your total account balance. So as you see to the graphic off to the right, at age 70, you're really, excuse me, you're really just taking 3.65% of your total account balance. And then the next year when you're 71, you're going to take a little bit more. It's going to be about 3.77%. At age 72, it goes up a little bit more. And as you see at age 73, you're still only taking out just a little over 4% of your account balance. And so I think that that's a key to remember with these minimum distributions, is that it's not forcing you to take out the whole account or a significant portion of the account. It really is a minimum amount each year, as you can hopefully see to that graphic off to the right. And as you get older, those percentages of your account that you're drawing out do gradually increase up in a trend, just like you see off to the right-hand side in that chart. Let me go ahead now and turn the slide and just show you a resource that might be helpful to some of you. Some of you may be wondering, well, gosh, I've got accounts at URS and I've got accounts at other places, and now that I've maybe got a bunch of year-end statements that have come in the mail, so I've got my year-end balances handy, where can I go to have an automated calculator calculate my minimum required distribution for me? And one of the sites that a coworker of mine showed me that I've thought has been really helpful is on the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA is their acronym, website. And you'll see that web address listed right there at the bottom. It's https://tools.finra.org/RMD and then another /. And so you see that there. Maybe I'll just give it a quick second if any of you want to grab a pencil or a pen and jot that down. If you wanted to head to that website just for a fun exercise, and they have, again, just a really intuitive, really easy online calculator that you could use there. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about now how URS can help you in calculating your required minimum distribution. URS has automated the process for you. And again, this is just with your URS accounts that we've automated that process for you. Every January, we set up minimum distributions from your URS accounts, and every January when we set up those minimum distributions to go out, we do that so that they'll go out at the very end of November. When those minimum distributions go out at the very end of November, for those of you that are receiving pension checks from us, those will go out with your pension check that generally will go, or that you'll generally be receiving at the very 1st of December. Typically speaking, I think most people get their pension checks December 1st or the very last day of the month. So keep that in mind. Now, we do set up those minimum distributions. Let me just correct myself and just mention that we do set up those minimum distributions automatically for the 401k and the 457 accounts. However, we do not set them up automatically for the traditional IRA accounts. And if you think back to one of our prior slides, one of the reasons why we don't set them up automatically for the traditional IRA accounts is because, as we talked about before, you can combine your minimum distributions from your traditional IRA accounts and just take them from one account. So again, just to restate and correct what I'd said earlier, we do only automatically set out we only set up the automatic required minimum distributions from the 401k and 457 accounts. When we set up those automated required minimum distributions from the 401k and 457 accounts, we set them up using the Uniform Lifetime Table. And so if you do have a spouse that is 10 or more years younger than you, and you would rather us not use the Uniform Lifetime Table, and you'd rather us use the Joint Lifetime Table so that the required minimum distribution will be smaller, please contact us at URS and let us know so that we can change the tables that we're using and use that Joint Lifetime Table. One of the questions that comes up when we set up those required minimum distributions at the beginning of each year, as I mentioned, we set them up to go out automatically at the end of November in just one payment. Sometimes people will call us and ask, what about, is it possible for me to take that required minimum distribution monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually? Can I take that amount, let's just say it's $1,000 for the year, and divide it up and receive monthly or quarterly or semi-annual payments? Or maybe people want to take it annually, but they don't want to take it at the end of November. Maybe they'd rather take it in July or August, for example. That is absolutely possible, and to do that, we would just need you to complete a URS withdrawal application. And it's just a simple one-page form, and you see a picture of that off to the right-hand side of the slide. And on that URS withdrawal application, you can indicate to us if you would like to take it in a monthly, quarterly, or semi-annual fashion, or if you'd still like to take it in one fell swoop, but at a different time. That's where you could indicate on that form to do that. To access the withdrawal application, you'll need to log into your URS account on the URS website, and underneath the Forms link that you'll see at the top of the page, you can access that withdrawal application. Or you could always give us a call here at the retirement office, and we'd be more than happy to send that out to you. Let me just turn the slide here and maybe answer a question that some of you might have in your minds right now, because this is a common one that comes up. And people will say, all right, well, let's say, for example, that I'm due to take a $6,000 required minimum distribution at the end of the year, but what happens if I take out some withdrawals throughout the year? So maybe, as you see in this chart, or in this example that we've got on the slide that's on the screen right now, your minimum distribution is $6,000, but in April you withdraw $2,000, and in July you withdraw another $1,000. Then we will automatically take that into account, and at the end of the year, if you've got us automatically sending out your required minimum distribution, we'll then just send you $3,000 at the end of the year. And I know that's sometimes a concern for people. What about if they take some money out earlier in the year? Is that going to be taken into account? And we will factor that in when we send out that required minimum distribution at the end of the year. And of course, if maybe you took out $7,000 all at once in April, that would have met your minimum distribution and in fact exceeded it. And so then we wouldn't end up sending you out any distribution at the end of the year. All right, then, let me go ahead and talk about a relatively new topic that's only been around just a few years is all, called a qualified charitable distribution, or sometimes it's referred to as its acronym of QCD. And what a qualified charitable distribution is that you can take from a traditional IRA account, not a 401k or a 457 account, it must be a traditional IRA account, your minimum distribution, and you can have a payment made directly to a charitable organization. Now, that charitable organization must be a qualified 501c3 charitable organization. It can't be made to a private foundation or a donor-advised fund. This has become very popular lately as a tax strategy for some of our participants. And so they can just take their minimum distribution from the traditional IRA and send it directly to their charitable organization of their choice. There's a couple of things that I want to point out to be aware of. Sometimes people will just have a 401k or a 457 with us here at Utah Retirement Systems, and they'll have heard about this qualified charitable distribution and want to take advantage of it. Well, to do that, you've got to take the money from your 401k or 457 account and move it to a traditional IRA account. If you're in that situation, it's a fairly easy transaction for us to help you with that here at Utah Retirement Systems. We would just need you to set up a traditional IRA account, and then it's a very simple form to move the money from your 401k or 457 to that traditional IRA account, because again, the qualified charitable distribution can only be made from that traditional IRA account. One other item that's really important to keep in mind and really important to remember is this, is if I wanted to, say for example, I wanted to take a qualified charitable distribution this year, but this year being 2019, but I've got all my money in a 401k or 457 account right now. Well, I've got to open up the traditional IRA account, move the money from the 401k or the 457 to the traditional IRA account this year, but to be able to do the qualified distribution, I've got to wait until 2020 to do that from the traditional IRA account. So in other words, you've got to have your money in the traditional IRA account in the year prior to the year that you're doing the qualified charitable distribution. And that's a key point to be aware of, because sometimes people will get thrown for a loop not realizing that if they want to do that qualified charitable distribution, the money's got to be in the traditional IRA account the year prior to the year that the charitable distribution is made. So please be aware of that. As you see it on the last bullet point of the slide, sometimes people will ask, if I do a qualified charitable distribution, does all of my minimum required distribution need to go to that charity, or can I just do part of it? And you absolutely can just do part of it. Let's say, for example, maybe you had your favorite organization that you wanted to give half of your minimum distribution to. You could do that and then receive the other half as withdrawal in that year. Let me go ahead and head down the home stretch here and just try to summarize a couple of the key points that we've talked about today. The first thing that I just want to emphasize is that although we here at Utah Retirement Systems do our best to automate the required minimum distribution process for you and to make it as easy and as simple as possible, ultimately it is each URS member's responsibility to make sure that their required minimum distribution is taken from their account. It is the member of the retirement system that the IRS will hold accountable for any penalties or if the distribution is not taken. So keep that in mind. We'll do our best to help you, but ultimately it's the member's responsibility. As you see on item number 2, just remember from that graphic we looked at earlier, that required minimum distribution really is a minimum. It's not, you don't have to take out the whole account, you don't have to take half of it, it's just a small portion that'll be withdrawn. As you see on item number 3, don't forget to take that minimum distribution from your pre-tax accounts. The penalties are substantial. And then last but not least, give us a call here at Utah Retirement Systems if there's something we can help you with on your minimum required distribution. If you have any questions on your specific account or on your particular situation, please give us a call. And again, we would like to emphasize again too that if you're still working at age 70 and a half for an employer that belongs to the state retirement system, please give us a call and let us know if you'd like to defer that minimum distribution. We may not know that you're still working for that URS covered employer, and we'll need you to give us a call and let us know. I appreciate everybody's time and joining us on the webinar today. And again, if you have any questions, please do give us a call.